Counselor Accents Podcast. Two school counselors who love their jobs. Oh, and they happen to have Southern accents too. Bless their hearts.
I'm Laura Rankhorn, and we are absent Kim Crumley for a little bit, so I'm going to take full advantage of that, and I'm going to hog our guest as long as I can. And I've already prepared him that Kim Crumley will jump on here soon, and I'm sure she'll make a scene when she comes on. So until then, Hasan Davis, I have got you all to myself. So let's jump in and get going. Why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Hey, Laura. Thank you all for having me. I'm really excited that you all got in touch. My name is Hasan Davis, and I'm the former Commissioner of Juvenile Justice for the state of Kentucky. I ran juvenile justice in Kentucky for 6 years, 3 years as Deputy Commissioner of Agency of Operations, and 3 years as Commissioner of Agency. 4 years, 6 years, I don't know. It was a while. And that was in that formal administrative capacity, really working hard to make sure the young people who fall through the cracks of the system find some way out. I'm a graduate of UK Law School, University of Kentucky, and Berea College, and I came to Kentucky to go to school, but I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia, and St. Louis, Missouri. So a lot of moving around, a lot of transition. My story.
Well, I heard you on the Keep Indiana Learning conference. That's where I first discovered you.
Okay.
And I was so captivated by your session. I think you probably did several sessions, but the one that I listened to was the one about your upbringing and how you went from the juvenile department to Juris Doctor.
Right, Juvenile Delinquent, the Juris Doctor.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, that's a good place to start. So, very early, I guess the very first piece is that is as a young person, really, at some point, probably up until about 6 years old, feeling like I was safe and the world was mine. You know, a father who worked hard at General Motors, and back then that was, I guess, still that's a great job, but an African American man in the 60s with a steady job at General Motors, union, all those types of things. And so we had a pretty stable environment. My older sister Teresa and I, as when we were the only two children, my mother made us feel loved and connected to the world. But as we grew up, I think things changed pretty dramatically and fairly quickly. My daddy, he's a very different man now. He leads a church that he's been in for a long time, but at that point he was probably, one of the bad boys that the bad boys called tough on the street. They separated. Separation leads to divorce. Things fall apart. And we started moving from aunt to cousin to friend, sleeping on pallets on the floor or on couches or five in the bed, wherever we could, as long as we could, till Mama finally got settled, sometimes working, several jobs to keep us in one place. And, in that transition from stability to being migratory in so many ways, she was the stabling force, making sure that, whatever it took, she made sure we had what we needed, even though we started, going on off the food stamp rolls, and we started, there are lots of things that changed dramatically. But I think I formally entered the school to prison pipeline in the first grade when I turned 7. And I was that kid who couldn't sit still and couldn't stop touching things that weren't his, couldn't stop asking questions and thinking about things that nobody else was even, considering. I couldn't take lines and make letters and make words and make sense. Later I learned that, it was ADHD and dyslexia, but at that time it was just bad kids, right? Even though IDEA had just started and we had lots of great things coming around for disability support, there was no real sense of that in place. And so my teacher one day, frustrated with that little broken boy, grabbed me up and dragged me across the room in front of my classmates to the closet in the back of the room, the coat room. When we got in the coat room, she said, "This is your classroom now." And turned around, and on her way out, she locked the door behind her. And so that became our ritual. Every morning she would drag me across the room into this box and explain that this is the place you belong, and then go off and do things for the amazing children that might be something one day. So that became a really pivotal experience. This daily reminder that you are not special, you are not normal. Um, and so I would scream at the walls and punch the coach, but I wouldn't go home and tell my mama because, why wouldn't this be the place, right, for a broken kid whose parents don't love each other and don't know if he's going to be in the same house next month or have three, and my mom was trying to make sure she keeps her family together. So I just accepted this is where I was supposed to be. And one of the great graces is my mother's always had this wisdom in her actions and her words. And she always, talked about, figuring out, two things you can do when you find yourself in difficult places. Figure out how you got there and figure out how you use it. There's, that's the choices we have.
Yeah.
And so me in this code room every day, screaming at the walls and punching, I knew why I was there, but I didn't know how to make this useful. But one day, after all these days of being dragged in there, I dry my eyes, stop screaming at the walls, and I look up and I realize that the code room is where all the other kids keep their lunch boxes. And I realized what God put me here for. I was, okay, this must be the place where I get full. Was it always? And so I started being a little excited about going to the code room. I said, come on, is it time to let's go, teacher? I gotta figure out what Susie got today.
You are a man after my own heart. Food is my love language, and
yeah. And so, the Susie with the peanut butter jelly without the crust, the kid with the fruit cups, the kid with the juice box. All of a sudden, I had access to all the stuff that I needed, right?
Yeah.
And until Mama started coming to school complaining about their babies coming home hungry, and they had to investigate the mystery of the coat room like a Scooby-Doo episode. And there I was with all these lunch boxes spread around me. And the teacher, in that frustration and anger, drug me out of the box and back across the room to that one magic seat right next to the teacher's desk. That special seat we all have. And so she can keep an eye on that bad boy. So it wasn't out of compassion, it was out of frustration and maybe embarrassment. But what she accidentally did was put me in a space where I could learn, right? What we know now with all this amazing science is that I'm an engaged learner. Right? That's my learning style. If you put me in a room of young people who are on their toes and on point, I can roll with them all day. It's been all my life I've been able to do that. If you don't lock me up in a box and isolate me, I'm on fire. But when you put me all by myself, there's nothing for me to feed off of. And so I start to die, literally. So, that became the thing, always trying to stay in the class, trying to stay in a space, even though every indicator was saying that I didn't belong there. Over my childhood, we moved schools a lot. We moved homes a lot, 13 different homes before I was 12 years old. Some of those are 1-month rentals where somebody would wake you up in the middle of the night and say, don't turn on the lights, get your stuff, we got to go. You'll be in a new school tomorrow. 5 different elementary schools, moving from, place to place, and always being that kid that, the teacher, says it's time for us to read out loud. And, all of a sudden, I'm spotlighted again as the stupid new kid. And so, I start figuring out that if I could get my hands on somebody fast enough, I'm that dangerous little boy that nobody wants to be next to, not that stupid little boy that doesn't know how to do anything. And I'd rather be dangerous than stupid. And so I started using that as my way, trying to figure out and navigate. 11 years old, I got my first arrest. It was moving pretty quickly. And I think that when you add it all up, the world was giving me a very clear sense of who I was going to be or what I had a right to be. And at some point I said, well, if that's the case, then I need to get as much as I can in as I can while I can. And so I was trying to live a full life before 13, before, somebody pulled the rest of it out from under me. And so me and my buddies had gone into, a pretty deep trench of behavior, absolutely unimaginable for most folk with a kid who was 11 years old. And at the end of it was this experience where we're all at the police station and having this engagement and argument with the cops. We'd have this one police officer who was related to the manager of one of the apartments that we had lived in for a while, and there was this tension between he and us because this was East Point, Georgia, right outside of Atlanta. Especially in the 70s and early 80s, it was arguably one of the most racially segregated and openly racist communities. And, there was just this tensions that were always there. And that one cop, he actually came into the police station while we were being processed and said something to the effect of, "Oh, I didn't realize it was y'all. If I'd have known that, I'd have took the call myself. And I'm pretty sure you would have all made it." I mean, it was just that kind of, and, so at the end of the day, we've been processed and fighting with the cops. All the mamas started showing up, and I think that most of your audience know families in crisis, and it's mostly mamas that are holding those families together. And when those babies hit that crisis point, and everything in their tightly controlled, barely in control world starts to spiral, they do too. And so they all came in sideways screaming, and I had to take 3 buses to get her. I might lose my job. I'm just letting them lock you up. All that pain that comes out that is hiding fear, hiding the knowledge that when systems get a hold of your baby and you're in crisis, there's a chance you might lose them for good, and all this stuff. But it's covered by this rage,
Right.
and so as my mama hadn't shown up yet, and so I was like, this is, maybe I should just ask the police to keep me.
Right. You're watching this unfold thinking, oh, what is this going to be like?
Yeah. And then my mom showed up, and she was just like cool as an ice cube. And that's when I realized I was probably going to die, because when they all come in excited, it's because they're still trying to get the fact that there's a problem in their head and they're trying to navigate it. When they have really calm, she's already got a solution. I was like, yeah, that's not good.
It's over. Yeah.
She thanked the police when she did the paperwork, and I was, like, okay, well, you don't go off in the police station because they might arrest you. So when we get outside, I'm not sure what we're going to do. So we get outside, I always tell people I did what I call the near, far, near walk. That's when you walk close enough to somebody that everybody knows you're with that person, but you're not actually close enough to them that they can reach you if they start to swing all of a sudden. So you got a little safety distance, but you're still in proximity. So near, far, near walking. And so I'm kind of watching out the corner of my eye and making sure that she's still calm, and she's just calm. And I was like, okay, well, maybe you don't go off in the police station parking lot. They call social services, open up a case, come to the house, all kind of stuff happens. So, when we get in the car, I don't know what I'm going to do. My mother had to borrow somebody's car to come get me because we didn't have a car. And so she borrowed a vehicle, come get me. We get in, and I sit down, but instead of like buckling up and everything, I sit there at the edge of the seat, no seatbelt on, my hand literally on the doorknob.
You're ready.
Like I'm about to bail out of an airplane. I'm like, just in case, I need to make sure that, I don't get set up. And we're riding, and I remember just, trying to figure out what this was. I mean, she wasn't looking at me. She wasn't talking. We were just driving. It was dark. We'd been at the police station for 5 or 6 hours. And and I finally got the courage to look up at her. And she's just bawling these huge silent tears. And she looked down at me and she said, "Baby, if you could see what I see every time that I look at you, you would know how great you already were." And
wow.
And that was, I mean, for a kid building a laundry list of no, this ain't you. You don't get to be who the whole world is telling that, the very best you can hope for is the thing that you've already got, this little bit, for her to say that, and to say it with a straight face, to say it with meaning, to say it in a way that made me believe she could see something I couldn't. Was a gift. I call it the double vision now, the ability to look clearly in the moment and see what the truth is, right? The present, our truth, and at the same time still speak and imagine and move toward the possible, that future self. And she was able to lay that out for me. This is where you are, not who you are. And that gift really it shook me first because, I didn't know how to respond to that. I've been fighting since I was 6 years old. I know how to handle, and so it kind of set me on a weird course trying to figure out what, what is this other thing that I could be. And that was a great gift, for me. Hey, Kim,
Hello. I am
how are
so
you?
sorry.
No worries.
I said that you would come in and make a scene, Kim, and you came in very quietly. I'm very
No,
surprised.
I was already like listening, like this sounds so good.
Well, and you've missed a lot. And so
I can't wait to hear it though.
yeah,
So,
I
okay.
love what you said about the double vision. And I feel like that is when you say that, I think, yes, moms have a gift at having double vision, but I also think educators
Oh,
and
absolutely.
school counselors,
Yeah.
I mean, our audience is mainly school counselors, but educators in general, I love what you said. We see what's there in front of us, but we can also see what they can become. And I love that term double vision.
Yeah.
Mm.
It's and that's, when I said I spend a lot of my work is with educators, counselors, therapists, folks who serve young people in all those capacities. And this really is one of the core messages, when I talk about being a hope dealer, which I think writ large, that's what we are. That double vision is at the core of it, right? To not get caught and trapped in what's right in front of you, but to be able to hold what my friend called detached curiosity about what could be if I'm here, if I'm engaged, what could this be, right? And I think that's really valuable and too often overlooked. I wound up on probation for the rest of my childhood. The judge did decide not to lock me up at 11 years old. Some of my friends who had previously been in trouble, wound up going to detention. But I was put on probation, and it was literally the next thing you do that 11 or 12-year-old boys do, whose frontal lobe isn't developed and their amygdala is in charge of everything. I call it the alligator brain. Any choice you do that is just natural child behavior, could trigger a response that will impact you for the rest of your life. And so, it became a very, very narrow path for me to navigate in the world that I was trying to live in. But staying close to home, my mother and my stepfather and my community really were the ones. We talk a lot about. I do a lot of work with agencies and folks, probation officers, and I talk a lot about those protective factors. When I educators, I talk about how we need to get young people engaged, not just in that cognition, but that the affective domain, right? Bloom's taxonomy always talk about, cognitive this. I'm like, but Bloom also talks about affect, the affective domain, the feeling house. He talks about the fact that we actually have to create relationship, give meaning and community, then we can actually expect the brain to fire and to trust us enough to get to the intellectual part of life. And so often we miss that opportunity. My mother started to enroll me in. She and my father are both artists, and so enrolling me in art classes, in jewelry making, in martial arts, in dance, and anything. And it took a lot. We were poor, and so it took a lot to manage that without a system to support those types of things. But she knew that was important. She knew that it was important for there to be something that defined me other than, one, my juvenile record, and two, my disability, that made education always seem like this foreign place for me. So a place where I could actually find and see myself as amazing in some way. And so those opportunities, I remember well. She would put us all on the bus and take us downtown to the theater. And people will always be like, well, you're on welfare. I hear this argument even now all the time. Well, poor people, why are you expending all this extra money to give your kids this stuff? You shouldn't be using the government's money like that. And what I realized with my mother is she wanted us to understand that we had a right to the whole thing, that there wasn't a truncated sense of what we have access to because of where we came from, right? And that creates a sense of belonging and community, a sense of dignity that that will hold you, and it held me. It allowed me to be in very difficult places and say, "This is not who I am. This is where I am." And so that so after that, the next year, when I turned 12 in December, and things were going well. I was on probation. Some of my buddies were coming back home, and I was. My mother and my stepfather were both working, and we had a super Christmas. Every once in a while you have that Christmas that is just like out of a movie. The giant Christmas tree, the lights and ornaments and candy strung around it, all the puzzles and toys that you see on Saturday morning cartoons under the tree, that kind of thing. And that was really amazing because for the last couple years we had been in such dire straits we couldn't afford it. Sometimes my father would go out and try and find a tree, he'd like find one on the side of the road or something. But some years we would just have to. My mom would just take the Christmas lights and she would pin them on the wall with push pins in the shape of a tree, with that. And then she would make popcorn and get out the needle and thread, and we would string popcorn on a needle and thread, and those would be the ornaments we strung on our light tree, right? And so this was pretty special, having all the stuff that we imagine normal families had. We didn't go downtown to the annual Christmas party for poor children at the Civic Center, where they had the tables lined as far as you could see with food, and the volunteers give you those compartmentalized trays and say, here, you can go as many times as you want, eat as much as you like. It was amazing. And when you were full, they would put you up on stage and sit you in Santa's lap and, take a Polaroid picture and then give you that gift wrapped box that, I know so many of your counselors, the boy 5 to 7, a girl 9 to 12, and those were amazing to have, but it wasn't the same as having your stuff, right? And so this Christmas was pretty wonderful. And, school started back right after the school new year. And just a few days into school, my neighbor comes banging on my door and the back door, and he's like, "My house is on fire, my house." And so I grabbed my father's fire extinguisher out of the kitchen, and I ran 3 doors down, and his mom, who had been making dinner for her husband, who works a third shift, had gone to check on the baby that started crying. And in the few seconds she was gone, that bacon grease in the pan caught fire. And that bacon grease fire went straight into the cabinet above the stove, and it went straight from the cabinet to the walls and up the walls, and then hit that insulation in the ceiling. And because, in some places, especially, in the South, we were in rural outside of Atlanta, there's always been this sense that, poor people ought to be thankful for what they get. That's how I frame it now as an adult who sees and understands the system and moves in it. But for whatever reason, there weren't firewalls between each of the housing units like the codes normally say. So because there weren't firewalls, when that fire hit the insulation in the ceiling, instead of consuming one family, it consumed 10. It took everything we owned in the world. And we sat there and literally watched our lives burn down after we'd just gotten it together. And by the end of the night, I was homeless again, living out of a hotel. And by early the next morning, I was, walking to school in somebody else's shoes and somebody else's pants. And, somebody would say, "Hey, that's the sweater my grandmama gave me for Christmas a couple of years ago," and you have to swallow down that pain that comes from living in other people's grace and still find a way to be thankful, because we're thankful, but it still hurts. And because Mama didn't want me in my 6th elementary school, the whole family had to relocate back into downtown Atlanta, but she kept me enrolled in Brookview, which was in East Point College Park area. And so I started a 5 a.m. wake up. I take a bus into downtown Atlanta, take a second bus back out to school, and then I would walk the rest of the way and to finish up my 7th grade school year. And after I finished my 7th grade school year, it was, I was enrolled in alternative school. And I was in alternative school for the next 5 years. But it was a pretty amazing school. Now, looking back on it, I realized that it was what I say is a real alternative school, providing a space for young people who are neurodiverse and socially diverse to find who they are. And it took me 2 years to realize that it was actually a private school, and 3 years to realize that my mama had been working to pay for me to be there by working for the school and doing odd jobs and offset printing and, all this other stuff that I had no clue about. And so, again, the gifts that people who love you and want, more than the whole world has ever promised you. I mean, there's a really clear through line about what my trajectory was. And my mother seemed intent on making that a lie. And I think that is that. And then she worked in cahoots with the administrator of the school. And I'll tell you, Dr. Lorraine Wilson is probably one of the most amazing educators I know. And whenever I speak to school counselors, she is the face that I see. She is the story I tell, because she was that advocate who made me believe that, one, education could be mine, that, me being different didn't mean that I didn't have a right to it or I couldn't access it. We just had to figure out the lens, figure out the right way. Dr. Wilson, I got called to Lorraine's office, and we called everybody by first names. When I first started, there were only 16 of us in the whole school, and it grew over the years. I moved into the school and lived there the last 3 years because my parents and the rest of the family were still struggling, and so I moved into the school. My older sister moved back to St. Louis with my biological father. My youngest brother moved to Milwaukee with my mother's aunt. My baby sister moved with cousins. So whatever she could do to keep us all safe without giving us up to a system that you have no guarantees in. And so I moved into the school. But I was called to Lorraine's office once. I was called to Lorraine's office a lot. Because I was still navigating with all those things riding with me. But this one time I got called to her office. I'd gotten in trouble, got sent to her office, and Dr. Lorraine Wilson was legally blind, had these really thick glasses that magnified her eyes, and so she always moved with purpose. Like she glided because she had to know where everything was. And so she had this really smooth movement about her. And her glasses were really thick and magnified her eyes. And she just I always thought she was like a Jedi. She just had this ability, this presence, and like she knew everything. And so she kind of glided into her office and sat down in the seat across from me. And I'm waiting for her to, give me the riot act that the explanation about it's finally time for you to, that's the speech that I'm used to. And then she says, I know who you are. And then she just kind of pauses and it's like, oh, this can't be good. And then she says, and I think that you could accomplish anything you set your mind to. And I was like, well, that makes no sense at all. So I sat there for a second. And then I remember, she's legally blind. The world literally turns to shadow just a couple of feet ahead of her. And so I kind of started swaying side to side to see if she would, the eyeball check, we used to call it, see if she would follow me. And she just kept looking straight ahead. So I was like, so I finally said, Lorraine, you realize it's Hasaan, right? And she just kind of sat there. and then she said, I know who you are. And I think that you can accomplish anything you set your mind to. And I was like, okay. And then she said, the only thing that you could do, Hasaan, is make me a fool for believing such great things about you.
Mm-hmm.
And for the very first time in my entire educational career, someone told me I was already great. Dared me to give up being great for something less. And just like my mom at the police station, there was this ability to see and recognize right here all this chaos going on and still say, wow, and what's we going to do next? So Dr. Wilson would do these things, like in math class, I would get frustrated because she called me an intuitive mathematician. I could look at a math problem. I could give you the answer. Look at the problem, give you the answer. I did it all the way through algebra. I could get all the way up to pre-cal. I could look at the problem and give you the answer. But I was still failing grades on all my papers. And one day, Lorraine says, well, Hasaan, just so you know, math isn't about the process. It isn't about the answer. It's about the process. I mean, every time I say it out loud, like in a group of teachers and educators, they all say, "Yeah, it's about that." I say, "Yeah, well, why do you all ask for the answer then at the end? Why don't you just say, tell me the process?" And so I would get frustrated. So she started doing this thing in class. One day a week, she would just say, "Okay, clear your desk," and she would just start. 13 times 3 plus 1 divided by 5 times 10, whatever the equation was, however long the string was. When she stopped, I had the answer. So she made me like math god of the universe one day a week. He was teaching me to find my own success, right? To define my success different from others, that I still had something, but I had to figure out, that, one day in class, Dr. Rain Wilson taught every class in school at some point. We were in like psychology class, and she was like, "Hassan, do you think you want to go outside and run around the school as hard as you can?" And I was like, "What? Yeah, I mean," and I never thought about it until you said it, but as soon as you said it, I was thinking about it, and that's exactly what I'm thinking. I want to go. And she was like, "Okay, you can do that." And my classmate was like, "What?" And she said, "Go ahead." And so literally, I went outside and I ran around the school like 5 or 6 times as hard as I could. And I come back in, I'm about to pass out, oxygen deprivation. I'm barely standing, but there's this sense of clarity, right? The first time I saw it, there was like this Claritin, one of those sinus commercials. I think it's like Claritin, and you look at it, and the screen is all blurry, and they're talking, "No, no, I could not see." And then they take the medicine, and they pull out the edge of the screen comes up, and you see this
Yeah.
sharp spring. The first time I saw that commercial, I was like, "That's it, that's it." She just like, "What are you talking about?" I said, "That's it. That's what it looks like when I can burn off enough energy to slow my brain down."
Huh.
Like the entire world gets sharp edges from me. Everything makes sense. Things connect. And so that Lorraine would let me go do this. And then I would come back and I would have this clarity and connections and things made sense. And so she was teaching me how to manage myself. She was teaching me that I could figure out how to stay in these places that have been ejecting me since I was very young. And so these were the kind of the tools that she was supplying me. And at the same time, keeping me moving forward. I'd get in trouble, and I remember walking down the hall with her once. I got put out of a class that was taking a test, and it was a science class or something. And so she's walking and talking with me, and I mean we're walking slow because she walks slow, and we get all the way to the end of the hall toward her office, and she says, "Oh, can go back to class and tell your teacher that you're fine, that you passed the test." And I was like, "What test? What are you talking about?" She says, "We just talked about all the major concepts, and you seem to have a good grasp of it. So go ahead and tell them." And I was like, "What? What?" And so it was this was the gift that she gave me. So over the 5 years there, and in the 3 years living with her at the school, she really became, she partnered with my mama, became those foundational pieces. And there was lots of other, those hope dealers who were scattered around the school itself and just in that environment with me. My senior year, I turned 18. Lorraine called me back to her office and sat me in that same seat and explained that I had just failed the class that I needed for graduation. And it wasn't going to be offered again before the end of the year, which meant that I wasn't going to be able to complete my requirements for graduation, and that she was going to have to ask me to leave. And it just crushed me. I was just sitting there going, "What do you mean?" I never imagined what, I wasn't even imagining graduating, let alone leaving. But we talked about it, but I was frustrated and angry. But I had to leave, and so I packed up and I moved back in with my mom, who had gotten resettled, my mom and dad, and all the kids had all come back, and so we were all back there. My best friend had moved in because his whole family life had kind of fallen apart, and so I moved back into, my brothers, Derek and Sean, my next older brothers. I have 3, Derek, Sean, and Tony. Tony's the youngest. He was kind of great at everything, and so he didn't have to navigate the world like us. Sean was is my stepbrother, who came to us at 8 years old with cigarette burns and bruises over most of his body from his mama's friends, and a real lesson in the world that power is the only thing that matters, and if you don't have it, you don't have anything. And then my foster brother, my best friend Derek, who, like I said, his family fell apart, but brilliant guys. I mean, these were they. So we kept each other alive, and the thing that for me was always trying to figure out how to get them to see how amazing they were. I always tell this story about my brother Sean. When I was at Horizons, I came home. I would come home sometimes on the weekends, and I came home to visit once. And Sean was sitting in the corner of the room with wires tied around his head. It looked really weird. And I was like, Kaz, what are you doing? Kaz. That was his street tag was Casanova, so we called him Kaz. He was like, yo, man, I'm talking to my girl. I was like, well, how you talking to a girl with wires tied around your head? So I took it from him. Hello, I said, hello, somebody answered. I was like, dude, where'd you get this? And he was like, remember that old Walkman? Walkman was a thing, right? Before we had iPhones and iPods and CD players even. You had a Walkman and 20 batteries. You was good for half a day, right? And I was like, yeah. He said, I took that old Walkman and I took the broken telephone that Mama had downstairs and I took them apart and I started messing with the boards in them. I got a little static, so I kept on messing with them until I got a dial tone. And I called my girl.
Oh my word.
I know. I was like, you made this? He was like, yeah. No. You made this? And he said, yeah. I said, no. I wasn't sure if you understood the question. You made this. I was pointing. You made this. He said, yes, I made that. Now, he built a telephone headset in his bed. And this was the 80s, right? We didn't have telephone headsets yet. We had that old phone in the kitchen.
We barely had cell phones. I mean,
yeah.
No, there were no cell phones in the 80s.
No.
You had car phones.
That's what I mean. A car phone.
If you were really high end, you had the cordless phone, right? But But I was like, man, you could be one of those electric guys. I mean, that seemed pretty amazing. But that's all I had. We didn't have computer guys yet. And he just started laughing at me. He said, "No, man, it's just what I do. We're hanging out at the house, but." Ain't nobody gonna let me do this in the real world. Then he got real quiet. He just looked at me. He says, "Bruh, we don't get to be great in the real world." And it wasn't a question. It was just clarification as far as he was concerned. Because I was always talking about what we're gonna do. Right? We're gonna show all these people that we're gonna be. And so that was. So I went back into that world, and I was, my thing was maybe I could get, if I can get Derek and Sean and Tony out there. Even if it took me sacrificing everything, because I only had one strike left. So I was like, if I could figure out how to maneuver them so that they're not caught up in this and they can go, it would be a gift to the world for them to be there. And Derek got expelled from high school, from his school, shortly after I got expelled, and then Sean not much longer after that. Derek and I took the GED. We all talk about taking the GED. We're going to blow the GED out, and we're going to go to college, and we're going to just make everybody be like, I didn't see that coming. Derek and I took the GED, and we finished like 2 hours early. And we were like, that can't be a good sign. It was like, well, either way, it's it is what it is. But we actually did really well. Again, one of those frustrations when you realize I could have done this in the 10th grade and avoided all this other chaos, maybe. I don't know. But so Derek and I took the GED, and I was like, let's go to college. We can do this. Let's figure out. And I heard about this college in Kentucky. Actually, I learned later that Lorraine told my mother about it and suggested that we apply. It's Berea College. And Berea is just an amazing place. You have to be poor to be accepted. Every student that gets accepted has a full academic scholarship. So it is a game changer as far as breaking the cycle of poverty. And so we had heard about Berea. So I applied to go to Berea. And that's actually the only place I applied to. And the week before classes were supposed to start, I had not received any word from the college. So not knowing a lot about college, I didn't know that if you haven't heard from a college the week before classes start, there's probably a really good reason for it. I just thought they must have lost my paperwork somewhere. So I actually picked up the phone and I called Berea College Collect. Y'all remember Collect calls back?
Yes.
when you can't
Yes.
afford to call, because long distance calls cost money. It's not like with our cell phones you can call around the world. And so I called the college and asked to be a collect, so the college would pay for the call if they accepted it. And I thought that was just a long shot in the first place, right? To call. But the thing that I've learned over and over again, right, is that the answer is no 100% of the time if you don't ask the question.
Yeah.
So
true.
why not?
That's good.
I learned you let people tell you no, don't tell yourself no. And that's what I tell the students I coach all the time now, my students that I mentor. But so I call collect, and the operator accepts the call, which surprises me because I was just a Hail Mary. And then she's like, so who do you want to talk to? And I hadn't expected to get that far, so I didn't have a name. So I just said, the director of admissions. And she said, please hold. And I was like, oh crap. Is she about to put the direct? And so the next voice was literally the director of admissions, John Cook, director of admissions. How can I help you? And I was like, hey, Mr. Cook, my name is Hassan. I'm from Atlanta. I applied to come to Berea. Classes start next week, and I haven't received my acceptance letter. So I'm just calling to see where it is. And you could almost hear the deep sigh, like, oh gosh, not really. And so he says, well, hold on, let me go find your file. And he goes and digs in whatever, oh no, you don't file, right? The garbage can hadn't been taken out yet or something. And he comes back a minute later. He says, okay, Mr. Davis, I'm going to have to be really clear with you. Berea is one of the most competitive application processes in the nation. We get thousands and thousands of applications for a few hundred spots every year. And I'm almost got my entire class filled. I've only got a couple spaces that have not been locked in. And I've got some very promising applications right here on my desk. I don't think this is going to work for you. What he didn't say was no. So I said, well, Mr. Cook, I need to know for sure. And he said, okay, let me call you back in an hour or so and confirm that. And so I hung up. And in my head, I was like, unless there's some kid from Virginia you just called, I got a chance, maybe. And about an hour later, the phone rings, and it's Mr. Cook, and he's got like this weird, like, I can't believe I'm about to say this out loud sound to his voice. And he says, okay, Mr. Davis, I think we are going to give you a chance. I mean, like, he's still trying to, I can't believe I'm about to say this out loud. And so that quick, all of a sudden, I'm a college student. I got a week to get my stuff together and to get to Kentucky from Atlanta. I started getting my clothes together in garbage bags and little tote bags that are around. And at this time, I've been apprenticed to a screen printer, a screen printing artist, silkscreen artist that my mother connected me with in her art community. And Bill Prankard was I always said that he was an eccentric old white dude. But now looking back, he might have been like 30, 35, right?
Yeah.
But so you have his perspective, and he owned apartments, and so I would help him out when I wasn't in apprenticing with him with screen printing. I would help him out with his apartments that he owned and handyman stuff, just little stuff. And so we're riding around a few days before I'm supposed to leave, and he watched past these apartments, kind of close to the projects, and he jumps out and starts going through this stuff on the curb. Now, what I know, having grown up in this environment, is that what's on the curb is all the leftovers from somebody's eviction at the beginning of the month, right? You get put out, you guard whatever you can. We used to have this process. We get off the bus and we see somebody's stuff out. We would stand there and try and guard it as much as we could from the predators that come around until the parents got off work and could cobble together a car, a truck, something to guard off whatever they can. Everything else you leave. And so, this was what couldn't be taken. And he's rummaging through it, and I'm embarrassed for him. But he finds this old raggedy box and at the bottom of the pile, and he tosses it in the back of the truck. And I'm just curious. I have no idea what this exchange is. But at the end of the week, I'm about to leave. And so we have like this going off to college party. And Bill Prankard shows up with this big chest, steel metal gray, rope handles, got a lock on the front. And he says, Hassan, you're a college student now. And college students deserve to have something to put their stuff in. And this is yours.
Wow.
And he gives it to me. So, I open it up and I dump all my clothes out of my garbage bags and my little tote bags, and I'm ready for college. I got this, and we throw everything to the back of the Gremlin, and we start for Kentucky.
Mm.
The car literally breaks down halfway, somewhere in Tennessee.
Oh,
I'm like, okay, let's just go home, right? This was a Hail Mary in the first place, but my father gets it back together, duct tape and chewing gum. He's amazing he makes things happen. He and so we get to Berea like at midnight. And Berea is a small town, especially in the 80s. I mean, everything shut on a Sunday. Everything shut down at 5, and so orientation's over. The student center is closing down. I catch the last student locking up, and they're like, orientation was like 10 hours ago. I'm like, that's not very helpful. I'm here now. This is all I got. So they call around and finally find one of the dorms that tell me to go over to the dorm, Bingham, and the head resident meets us there, Virgil Burnside, and he explains that all the beds are gone, but they've got overflow in the lobby. They've got some beds set up in the lobby, and there are like 4 other guys there. And so this is going to be where I stay until, a dorm room frees up. And he's like, don't worry, people drop out the first week or so. I'm like, oh, that's great to hear. Thank you very much. So we bring my trunk and stuff in, and my mom reaches into her purse and she pulls out a $20 bill, her last $20, and she says, okay, baby, it's time for you to decide who's right about you and who's wrong. But you have to make a choice now. And she left me in this new world where people didn't look like, think like, act like, talk like me, to try and do something that nobody ever imagined that I could do. About a week in the lounge, and me and one of the other guys there, Marcus, we got a room in Bingham and became roommates. And I would wait for Marcus to go to sleep. He'd be hanging out, so it'd be late when everybody, at freshman year, everybody hangs out, and so it would be late at night. When I was sure he was finally asleep, I would dig into the bottom of my drawer and pull out my penmanship pad. Red line, blue line, red line. And I would practice my handwriting like I've been doing my entire life. I'd practice, 3 or 4 pages, and I was sure he was asleep. And then I would get my desk lamp out and I would go through my books for the next day, and I would figure out which class I might be able to read 3 or 4 pages over and over again, over and over again, over and over again for the next couple of hours, that I could catch on to enough that I could go into class and blurt it out and make it look like I know what's going on, right? And I was in 0 level English and 0 level math the entire first year, so they didn't even count for basic college credit to get me up to remedial. So everything about this is saying, this is not you. You're an imposter. You don't belong here.
yeah.
But there's this voice in my head saying that if you could see what I see, you know how great you were. So I made it 3 semesters, mostly faking it. I mean, I learned really good in middle school through high school how to listen really closely. As long as I was close to people who were talking about it and I could convince people or get people into a conversation about it, I could make an intuitive leap, and I could manage to be in a conversation. And since I wasn't afraid, like 90% of young people are, to be heard and to be seen, those were the things that allowed me to stay in places, because it seemed like I knew what was going on. I was always engaged, and but eventually I did get expelled. I got expelled because I just couldn't keep faking it. When you get to those deep level classes, and I wound up going back home, and running with my brothers, and doing, keeping them alive and keeping us safe. But I realized that if I didn't do something pretty dramatic, that was going to be the end of it.
Yeah.
So one day I wrote a letter to my mother from Fort Knox, Kentucky. I said, "Dear Mama, I'm joining the Army today. I see when these people let me out, but I had to make a decision today, so I did." And so I went through my training, which is a whole other. It was a great adventure. I learned a lot about myself, and I also cemented the idea that I had a right to demand things that other people thought I didn't deserve.
Mhm.
The moment I raised my right hand and gave an oath to give my life, the expectation changed. So it wasn't just me hoping and wishing. I believed that I had a right to things, and so I finished up my basic training and advanced training, and I cycled back into the Army Reserve. As soon as I got home, I bought a one-way Greyhound bus ticket back to Berea. And I got to Berea in January. January we used to call short term. So all the students just take one class a day, one class for a whole month, and real deep dive. And so, and I went to the dean of students, and I went and knocked on the door and said, "Hey, I'm Hasan Davis. Used to go to school here. I'm trying to get back into school." He was like, "Okay, I understand that, but I don't think it's going to work out for you right now." And I said, "Okay, sir. Thank you. I'll see you tomorrow." And the next day I came back. "Hey, how are you? I'm Hasan Davis. I used to go to school here." He said, "Well, you were here yesterday, right?" "Yes, sir, I was." He said, "You want to get back in school?" "I do." He said, "But I told you yesterday that you can't." "You did." He said, "Well, you still can't." I said, "Okay, sir, thank you. I'll see you tomorrow." And the next day I showed up and he said, "Mister, what are you doing? Why do you keep doing this?" I said, "Well, sir, this is the only thing on my to-do list. So the sooner you get this done, I guess you can do whatever else it is that you do in your job." And he says, "Son, you still can't come back to school here. This isn't going to work out for you." And I called um, Dean Hager, Paul Hager. I called him a liar because when I left, one of the things you have to do when you leave school, like I did, is you have to meet with the dean of students. And he said, "This is hard. Berea is 99% of the students here are first generation college students. They've
Mhm.
never experienced this before. It's a hard transition. Many of them are the first in their family to ever imagine it. So it's not easy, and it's the spiel, and it's hard in environment to navigate and to shift so fast, and lots of people get challenged. When you're ready to come back and you got taken care of your things, Berea will still be here." So that's the promise, and I imagine that's the promise that every good, counselor, every good administrator makes to students who are in crisis. Well, most of those students don't come back, right? They go somewhere else. They make up a story. They pretend it never happened. Uh, but I came back, which is an anomaly. Very
Mhm.
few people show up to the site of their worst failure in a battle. And so I reminded him of what he said, and he said he remembered that conversation. And so he said, "Okay, I'll go talk to the scholarship committee and see if they have any thoughts about it. So once you come back tomorrow," which was great that he invited me because it was already pinned into my schedule. So the next day I showed up and he said, "Okay, Mr. Davis, I managed to get you back in for the spring semester. You're going to be on academic probation, labor probation, social probation, and convocation probation. But you're going to be a student." And I was like, "Well, I was on all of those probations when I left. So this is like breaking even. This is great. I like this." And so I got back in, and that's beginning of the spring semester. First thing I did was went to all my professors and said, "Hey, I really need to make this work. So can you let me know if I'm not doing, and I wasn't ambitious. I said, can you let me know if I'm not doing D plus work?" Right. I mean, I just need to get through. I'm not trying to be anybody's scholar. The bar is very low now and I got to get over it. And so I was really clear. And when, and one professor, he was, you know, it was a freshman seminar class, and we would have these conversations, and so I was all into it. It was like the paper chase in my mind. This is what college was. He would say things, and I was like, "I don't agree with that," and I was like, "Yes, this is like," and that what I didn't realize is I was the only one who in that class who wasn't a true freshman, who wasn't 18 years old, looking at the professor as the god of all knowledge and just writing everything down verbatim.
Mhm.
And so while I was engaging with him like I thought this was supposed to be, apparently it wasn't what he wanted. So at the end of the semester, he calls me to his office and explains to me that we had a final paper that all the students did in his class, that he averaged 30 minutes on each of the final papers, and then he saved mine for last. Then he went to the library and checked out all of the sources that I cited, Then he spent 4 hours combing through my paper, matching it with the cites, until he found, and this is a direct quote, 2 sentences that are close enough to original text that I feel comfortable charging you with the academic crime of plagiarism. And he looked me right in my face and just explained this to me. And I was just dumbfounded. At first, I thought maybe, it was a joke. I was looking for the tail, and he's just dead serious. And inside of me, of course, is that other Hassan, right, who doesn't allow people to threaten his life because, and I've been hurting people since I was 6 years old, threatening my life. And I'm sitting here with this man, and so I'm like, why would you do this? And he said, well, your opening statement and thesis were so good, I couldn't convince myself you wrote them. Which again, one of those, when somebody feels that comfortable in their transparency, it's the clarity was there. And I was like, well, what do you think now? He says, well, you wrote a pretty amazing opening statement and thesis, but I've got these 2 sentences close enough to original text that I'm comfortable charging you with the academic crime of plagiarism. And so I asked, I said, well, what's to stop me from just walking out here with the paper? I mean, you can fail me in your class for not turning the final paper in, and I won't have all of this. And I think in that moment, he looked up and realized that I was between him and the only door out of that cage that he was in. And I'm still trying to measure myself, because I realize that everything about what my brain is telling me to do will confirm everything he thinks he knows and made him do this. And so I'm struggling hard and I'm talking fast. I'm like, okay, I'll tell you what. And I threw the paper down. You do what you have to do, but you need to understand you can't stop me. And I walk out, and it sounded really courageous, Braveheart kind of it, but it really was just me desperate to get out of there. And my brain is just screaming, break something. And I walk out, and everything I'm in my head. I'm like, okay, call your brothers, pack your stuff, get home, stop pretending. I thought about Sean's voice in my head, right? We don't get to be great in the real world. And lesson learned. Okay. So I walk across campus. I'm angry, and I got to go see Dean Hager and apologize for him making all those decisions and all that trust, and me breaking it immediately and failing. And I'll go to my mailbox at the student center, and inside of it is a paper bag envelope. And I open it up, and there's a bandana. And if you've ever seen pictures of me as a young person, I always had a bandana on. That was my tag. And inside of the bandana was wrapped in plastic, and it was a Japanese rising sun with characters. And written in marker on the outside of it were these words: inevitable victory for Hassan. With love, Mom. Mm-hmm. And I learned years later that the symbols on the side were inevitable and victory. And so I'm sitting here with this message from my mama that, of course, she had to send like 6 days ago, when I was still telling her, oh, no, Mom, everything's great. It's good, because I don't want her worrying, because she's been worrying for me her whole life. And I think I got a good poker face, and clearly I don't. But there's this message: inevitable victory for Hassan with love, Mom. And so I sit down on the wall outside the student center with this message from my mama, and with these expulsion papers that I'm about to go turn in. And there's this voice ringing in my head. It says, it's time for you to decide who's right about you and who's wrong. But you have to make a choice, baby. And so I said, okay, I'm not done yet. I did my paperwork. I apologized to the dean for betraying his trust. And I left, and I said, I moved to the next town over, Richmond, because I knew I couldn't go home again. I knew I wouldn't get out of that again a third time. So I started working construction. But I said, I'll be back. And they were like, no, you won't. So I worked construction for a year. And I came back to Berea. And I came to the dean, and he was like, no, Hassan, it's not going to work. I said, Dean, how about this? How about you let me go and talk to that committee? Let me say what I got to say. And if they tell me no, I'll just leave. but I just need to know that I did everything in my power, that there was nothing I left on the table. I can't leave without knowing I did everything I could. And if they tell me no, then I'll leave. No trouble. And so he arranges for me to go and speak to the committee, which is very unusual. He said, you got 5 minutes. And I went in and I just said, nobody's going to look at a place like Berea College that gave a guy like me 3 chances and say, what a terrible place that is. But what if I can do this? What if the things I imagine can happen? It'll prove everything about what Berea stands for and everything I believe in myself. I took a deep breath and I said, I just need you to loan me $3,000. They were like, what? Remember, Berea pays everything, right? And I'm like, and of course, in the 80s, that's like 20 grand I'm asking for. And they're like, what? I was like, yeah, there's this new computer called a Mac Plus. And it has Microsoft Write 1.1 with spell check and a Grammatic Mac program. I'm not even sure what those are, but I think if I had those tools, I could finally get what's inside my head that I think is so amazing out.
Wow.
See it. And if it's terrible, you can tell me it's terrible and I'll leave, but I think there's something there. I just need you to give me one more second chance. And just like Mr. Cook, those years before, with no good reason, they said, okay. And you're going to be on academic probation, labor probation, social probation, convocation probation, and double secret probation. And they said, and you have to promise not to come and talk to us if you get kicked out again. You have to promise to leave. I was like, that sounds pretty fair. And so I got the loan. I got my computer. Actually, I'm looking at my Mac right here. I've got it. I've still got it. It's right there behind my other desk. And so I started the semester. I got back in, and I'm carrying this with me. I've got a big bag for it still. And I'm carrying a 25-pound personal computer, my first personal computer. This is the very first ones. Every classroom, I'm setting it up. I'm in the back of the room. And people are like, what are you doing? I'm making sure is what I'm doing. I made the dean's list my first semester back.
Wow.
And once I started getting past the probations and past the sense of not being, and the big change was I finally had the courage to ask for the things that I needed, instead of fearing that if I tell people that I don't see the world different, they try to put me in a box again. I realized that, there are people here who wanted to help me, that there's access to all these things that I never accessed because I was afraid that was a tell, right? That I was, but I was finally asking and seeking that kind of support. So once I got off probation, I was voted homecoming king. I was elected president of the student body. I received the Navy V-12 award, which is one of the highest awards that a student can receive. And at graduation, my senior year, because I was president of the student body, I gave the opening prayer and welcome. And so I stood on the stage with all of the dignitaries, and just as I took the podium to give the opening prayer, I looked up, and the usher was escorting my mama down to her seat. And there's this voice ringing through my head. If you could see what I see every time I look at you, baby, then you'd know how great you already were. And and so I gave the opening prayer and welcome and the thank you, and had 30 family members show up from across the family, because I was the first in my entire family generationally to ever graduate college. And I look back on it, actually, all of my cousins who were between the ages of 6 and 12 at the time, most of them have graduated college.
Wow.
It's about that moment that shows people that there's a new reality, right? And so from there I went on to law school, and that's a whole other that would be a whole other segment. So I'm gonna take a deep breath, collect myself. But yeah, it's been an adventure, a big part of why the work that I do is I think is so important, especially with school counselors, with educators, with hope dealers across the board, is because I have experienced the impact that those people who choose to, they don't have to, but they choose to make a child's well-being and possibility their mission. there's no question that is the gift that allowed me to just have the brazen courage to believe, with all of those things lined up behind me, that, oh, college, let's go try that, and do it with a straight face. Uh, Having those people look at me and see me and allow me to see myself different were absolutely pivotal in my ability to make that, to navigate and believe that thing about myself.
Wow. What a story of resilience and persistent. I don't know if I know anybody as persistent as you are after
Pretty
hearing your
persistent.
story. You have to be persistent. And I think just this reminds me of the hurdles that some students are going to have to navigate to get to a better life than what they're in now.
Yeah.
And to teach that I think that you ask and get what you need. And maybe that's a lesson that we need to be instilling into students is ask for what you need to be successful, because they know probably what they've got to overcome. But I think that is why so many students don't move forward. They remain in that cycle because once they start hitting those hurdles, which they are going to hit, and it's so easy for them to be drugged back into what they were in that feeling of, well, everybody's right. This is exactly what everybody says, and I am. And so that message of, I love Hope Dealer. That is a huge takeaway, because we do have the power for good, and we have the power for evil.
That's exactly right.
I'm picturing you as a kid. I cannot see what you're saying, seeing you sitting there with all these books behind you. But I know that kid. We all know that kid. We've got a full of those kids. And sometimes it is just so aggravating as an educator, because to get through to they repeat, like you were saying, you repeated these same behaviors, and to just not give up as an educator, because we don't know what that pivotal moment's going to be, what those words that we say may be. That's my big takeaway. And I think it's going to be a big takeaway for a lot of school counselors and educators. I can't wait to hear the first of this. I'm sorry I missed the first of it, but this was so important, and I am so honored that you came on and you shared this with us. Thank you so very much.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate.
So I'm sure that we're going to have people saying, I need him to speak at my school. I need his contact information. You speak at schools.
Absolutely.
Frequently.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So tell our listeners, if they want to get in touch with you, what they need to do.
Sure. My website is hasandavis.com. There's a lot of good information on there about, in addition to speaking, I do a lot of training and development for educators and adults who work with young people across systems. But the core of my work used to be in the schools, working, from elementary through high school, engaging those students. And that's something that I enjoy, and I miss having been able to do more of. So hasandavis.com, there's a link in there where you can actually send a request for, I guess it's like an email link or something. And then my email is there, hasan@hasandavis.com. And the website talks about my living history. I do living history interpretation too. I tell the story of African Americans in American history, like York of the Lewis and Clark expedition. Tell his story as the only African American member of the expedition. During the bicentennial of Lewis and Clark, the 200th commemoration, the Department of Interior and National Parks actually picked me up to be York for the nation. So I was York for the nation.
Wow.
Wow.
And telling his story across the country, along the Lewis and Clark Trail. And I wrote a children's book, The Journey of York. Came out in 2019, I believe.
Oh my goodness.
And it was exciting to finally get the story, because I've toured the one-man show that I wrote. I've toured it across. I've probably done 600 performances in the last 20 years. National parks, big, historical events, to classrooms, universities, the whole. So there's information about that. I have other living histories I do to a Civil War soldier, and then Joe Louis the boxer. And then my other books have information too. I have a book, the book that is my story is called Written Off: How One Man's Journey Through Poverty, Disability, and Delinquency is Transforming the Juvenile Justice System. And that when I was leaving my role as commissioner, realizing that there were folks who were asking me again. I guess someone actually said, Hasan, you speak to teachers and educators and all these folks all over the place, but you're going to die, which I thought was a terrible lead in. Then they were like, but it would be great if people could still take lessons from your living. And I was like, oh, okay. And so that came out wonderful, and I've had lots of opportunity. I've done book studies with school districts, with leadership teams, with school counselors, using it as a book study and conversation, which has been wonderful. And then I wrote my first book of poetry. I published all my poetry I've written for the last 40 years, finally this year, and it's in a publication called Human Rights. And then just a couple months ago, I published my newest book, which is actually it's called The Race, and it's actually the poem that I wrote that I intro my keynotes with. And somebody said, you should get some illustrations. That'd be an amazing story. And so I got an illustrator to illustrate it this last year, and so now I actually use the slides and the visuals. I was speaking in L.A. earlier this Monday, and the audience is just really, especially this audience, is such the images with the story that tells. It's about a kid escaping special ed class, basically, and going out to, he hears all this excitement outside at the races, and all the other kids get to do this great stuff, and so he sneaks in and slides in, and they don't want to let him in, but the fans and other people say, come on, give him a shot, why not? And so he gets a shot at it. Doesn't do great, but for him, it's amazing because it's the first time he's ever had a chance to do anything, and so he gets caught and dragged back, but he realizes after having that experience that he has a right to it, so he starts crafting a plan to escape to get to his next great race, and it's just, I've been really proud. When I wrote it, it mirrors my story a lot, and that's the thing in it, the little pieces of my story throughout. It was my personal mental health that I wrote it for. When I started to share it, and I hear young people when they hear it talk about, yeah, that's that feels like me, and I hear hope dealers saying, yeah, I see myself in the story as that one who who slipped the key or gave the note or said, give him a shot, and it's just been feeling really good for that to be in the world and for folks to be able to access it, and so I'm really excited. And we take a deep breath. I get excited.
Wow.
Forget to breathe when I get excited. So yeah.
Wow. I mean, that's a lot. That is a lot of accomplishments, and I'm just wondering, do you ever sleep? So that is amazing.
I don't actually.
I bet. But you're always going. Thank you again for sharing all that you share, and thank you for all the good work that you're doing for our youth in our nation, and keep it up. We appreciate you.
Thanks so much. Well, I appreciate y'all, and thanks for the opportunity to come hang out.
We've enjoyed it. Thank you for being with us and sharing your story. This has been great.
Thanks a lot, y'all.